So it's usually the speaker who's sweating up here, but with this give and take and with the cybersecurity issues at hand, we have Duncan Brumby from UCL, and we're here to enjoy the talk on generative AI lessons from Dickens for the information age, and we're so happy to have you even with all the ups and downs of our cyber security issues. So welcome to that. That's definitely a lesson for me. So we are here to enjoy the talk, and then of course we'll have time for Q&A, but also don't forget we're going to 100 watt for drinks and bites if you're able to join at 5 o'clock. And Duncan is also around today and tomorrow, and especially if you're PhDs, PDNs, if you haven't signed up to talk with Duncan, he's available. So I'm massively grateful for Duncan to enjoy our time here today, and I'm really curious about his ideas on generative AI as a recognized leader in HCI. So with that said, let's give Duncan a round of applause and he can get started. Yay!
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm super excited about this talk. It kind of is the result of some ideas I had over the winter holidays. And so I've just put this together, and I'm looking forward. So I'd really look forward to your feedback. Right, so thank you. So yeah, I want to talk about generative AI. I mean, because AI is literally everywhere. But I'm going to talk about it with this lens. I mean, we just finished Christmas, right? Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens. It's this ancient story that we all know. But for me personally, this is actually right near, this is our building at work at UCL. And just a couple blocks over is a house where Charles Dickens lived after he wrote Christmas Carol. But it's kind of like a bit of a nice thing to come back to. My main thesis here, the main statement, is that AI is just a tool, right? Nothing more, nothing less. It's a tool. And I think that's super interesting. You know, I'm in human-computer interaction, HCI, and what that means is I study the intersection between people, psychology, and computer science, the tool builders. And good HCI is about looking at and understanding people, their challenges, what they want, what they need, and then telling the tool makers to go make an awesome tool. And when it's done really well, you get tools that change the world. So there's an evolution of human tools here, you know, from the basic, primitive, prehistoric stone tools we had through to this iPhone I'm now holding in my hand to capture audio, right? It's just a tool. The reason why the iPhone made Apple the wealthiest company in the world is because they nailed it, right? They made a super tool, and I can't imagine living my life for a day without it, right? Because it supports so many daily activities, and it does so really well. I think ChatGPT, large language models, generative AI has the potential for a similar round of innovation. But I think there's also a lot of things we need to confront before we fully embrace this. The talk is of 3 parts because, after all, 3 is the magic number. We've got part 1, the quest for making artificial life. Part 2, I'm going to really lean into the thing that I see a lot at the moment, which is the anxieties around generative AI in places like this, in universities, and how that's playing out right now, right? And the discussions that are taking place. And then I'm going to talk about what happens in the next 5 to 10 years when the winter comes, because it will come. The hype machine will slow. At the moment, though, we are living through an AI spring, a renaissance, if you like. So this was earlier in the year. So several people this year received Nobel Prizes for their contributions to science and the world. And this was for UCL newsletter, focusing in particular on Jeff Hinton and Demis Hassabis. And so this is for foundational work in developing the science of our current round of AI, but also setting up companies. So founding of Google DeepMind, which is both doing fundamental basic science, but also doing really good engineering and with a view to actually solving really deep and important problems like, in health, right, and sequencing problems. And they started out by looking at how people play games, right, like AlphaGo and that kind of stuff, but then learned from that to then have applications to our health and well-being. So no wonder it's a hugely valuable company. And I saw Demis give a talk last year at UCL, and it was a really, really great talk. Super smart guy and a well-deserved recipient of this award. So I think there's at least 3 areas in which we can think about how the promise of AI could make our life better or change it. The first one is work. I love this cartoon. Is this like familiar? Like every day we start with a plan and, we want to get something done and just other things get in the way, right? So there's often this disconnect between what we want to get done and then what we're able to get done. And that's fine, right? Because we need to be reactive. You can start with a plan, but you need to adjust your plans for the day. New stuff comes up. But it's a little overwhelming. Our days are overfilled, right? There's so much busy work in the modern era, so much busy work. And we somehow struggle to cut through that. Email or digital communications, I think, is just a prime example of this. There's a lot of important stuff in email, but I bet all of your email accounts are completely overloaded. And you're having a great holiday right now with this IT strike, right? So use it. But yeah, the promise here is that AI could potentially help us out here. I think it could also potentially help us out in terms of caring for us, whether that's an aging population, we need robots to care for us when we get older, or it's more, this is the movie Her, Joaquin Phoenix here is kind of basically he's got a counselor. So there's a massive chronic issue of low-level mental health issues at the moment. And what this movie was exploring was the idea that the issues of loneliness and depression and anxiety could be helped by putting in an AI into your ear and having a constant therapist there guiding you through life every single day, right? If everyone's seen the movie, I hope. It doesn't end well, right? And there's a reason for that, because it's a constant echo chamber. This one is the one that truly terrifies me, though. War. War is terrifying. There's a lot of war happening right now in our world. And the calculations of war are usually because you need soldiers to go out there and fight for you. And what's truly terrifying is if we get to a place where we're just using robots. And I think I still remember 9/11 when it happens to this day. The reason why 9/11 was so terrifying is because you had people that were prepared to basically the suicide bomber, right? That it changed the calculation of war, and that terrified us for a generation. This is going to change the calculation of war again, and it's going to be horrific, right? The moment you suddenly have people that there's no person involved here. You just got this robot dog running around shooting people, right? That's going to be a very dark future. It's dystopian reality come true. So this is kind of like a mixture of work, caring, and the darker sides of human competition. So why are we doing this? Why are we creating artificial life? What's driving this? Despite this potential risk, why are we committed to this endeavor? It's a long been part of our stories. So Geppetto makes Pinocchio because he wants a son, right? He wants a son to love. He doesn't have a son, so he makes Pinocchio and puts all of his love into this toy puppet he makes live. Frankenstein's monster is fundamentally somebody has died and I'm bringing back to life through electricity, right? It's coming back from the dead, right? Preserving, living forever, but you end up making a monster, right? Which takes away life. And so this idea that we're using our tools to understand our place in the world. So Icarus built wings to try and get to the sun. The sun is giver of life on this planet, right? It's our big nuclear reactor in the sky that powers all life here. Icarus's desire there was to go touch the sun to understand life, what's going on here. And in doing so, he used a tool, he built these wings, and it all went wrong, right? Plummeted back down to Earth. So you've got to tread carefully. You've got to understand what you're doing. And going to fiction, sci-fi has been telling us this for the last generation, if not more, the perils of making truly conscious machines. We've got like Skynet in the Terminator, the Borg in Star Trek, HAL 9000 in 2001 Space Odyssey, the machines in the Matrix. It just goes on and on and on, right? We simultaneously want to push towards this singularity, a truly conscious machine, knowing full well, we've already explored this in our fiction, where that goes, right? Or where it could potentially go. I'm not even going to entertain any of this, actually. I just want to kind of put that out there. Who knows whether they cross the singularity? Who cares? It doesn't really matter. The point is, I think it's just a tool, right? We are using these tools to reason about why we're here, why are we conscious, what is consciousness, and it helps us express our understanding of this through these tools we're building. But they are just tools, right? Let's not forget that. ChatGPT is not yet, well, it doesn't matter if it is, it's still just a tool, right, of our making. It's reflecting our own values, and it's inspired by us, hence going back to the original work there on all this deep reinforcement learning. It's based on neuroscience. So let's focus instead, though, instead of this kind of like this future, whether it's amazing or it's dystopian, let's just focus on here and now, right now, today. So one of the best talks I saw last year was Kate Crawford's keynote at CHI 2024. And in that talk, she talked about at least two major challenges with current AI. And it's basically the thesis I've just made, that like the distraction is the future. Let's focus back on the present. So the present is that these technologies are using huge amounts of natural resources, lots of water and lots of precious resources. And, you know, we've explored this again in our fiction already. So Don't Look Up, great movie on Netflix. The meteorite is hurtling towards Earth. Everyone is going to die. And what do the tech billionaires do? They seize an opportunity to get more natural resources. So they sabotage the plan to save all of humanity so they can get a bit more special ore out of the meteor. Everyone dies. It's all done through comedy, right? But it's kind of like a deep lesson there, right? Kate Crawford also talked about that we don't need to wait for the machines to enslave us. We're already enslaving ourselves. So the AI tools that we're using require human judgment, and that is requiring people to work long hours, often in quite poor conditions. And there's a lot of secrecy around this as well, inside the AI factory. And we've explored this in our own work. We've studied people who work on Amazon Mechanical Turk for their living, and it's pretty hard, right? And not very pleasant. They do a lot of work, get paid very little, and are put into impossible situations where they have to make very difficult decisions about how they're going to manage their day. And they have zero protection as well. So they're not unionized or protected with any kind of reasonable laws or protections. It's the gig economy. And so, you know, this is in Amazon Mechanical Turk, but the same applies if you're using Uber or Deliveroo or any of these services. Casualized labor. Yes, it seems great because it's on demand, but it's not great, right? So we've kind of already opened up some problems here. So that's today. So let's talk, why am I talking about Dickens? So Dickens, an author, somebody who's been dead for many years. What has Charles Dickens got to do with any of this? So that, you know, yes, he was a writer, but from a long time ago. What's the parallels? And I'm going to argue that there are deep parallels. So Dickens was writing during the era of the Industrial Revolution. This was a period in England where people moved from the countryside into the cities, the big cities like London, like Manchester, and they moved from doing farming work to working in factories. You've got all this great art depicting these kind of horrific scenes, right? And it was horrific. In the same way I've just talked about how working in the gig economy has no protections, those early factories had no protections. There was child labor, people lost arms and legs. You know, it was risky work, right? It was the Wild West. And so with this huge period of change came opportunities for some to get really rich, right? But there's huge amounts of exploitation. And that created a whole load of tensions, and societal upheaval played out. In particular, there was a group of people called the Luddites. So this is a group of people that were terrified by the machines. So terrified, in fact, that they went to destroy them, right? So they saw them as an existential threat to their way of life. And it's the pause. Let's stop. Let's stop this nonsense. Let's pull the plug. And you can see some similar noises coming out of the AI excitement. This is a fool's errand. This goes nowhere good. Let's pull the plug on this before it's too late. It's a Luddite way of thinking. And maybe some of you have had these thoughts. Will AI take my job? I think we know the answer to this. It's not that AI will take your job, it's the person who's using AI will take your job. But there's a nuance to this. I'm going to play that out in a moment. But it's fears. And this is why I think we need to look at Dickens again, because what his most enduring tale, Scrooge waking up after being visited by those four ghosts, it's an epiphany, a moment of clarity and of realization, framed within the past, present, and future, what is going on, right? And it's with that you can then move forward with clear purpose of mind. You've got to name your fears. You've got to acknowledge your fears. This is a picture of me, in case you don't recognize me, in my sports outfit. And I'm highlighting here, everyone focuses on the three ghosts, past, present, future. I mean, I always do. But there's the fourth ghost, and the fourth ghost is Marley's ghost, the very first ghost who visited Scrooge. And Marley is probably the most important ghost of all, because Marley is weighed down by the chains of habit of life. So Marley has these he's stuck in the same habits of thought, doing the same thing day after day, and it blinds you. You need to break free of those, have moments of clarity. And only when we break free of our chains, we can actually see the problems for what they are. So that's part one done, the quest to make artificial life. My main thesis is that AI is just a tool, and we need to confront our fears and name them. With that framing, I'm going to launch into part two, which is what I see going on in universities right now. So I'm a professor at UCL. UCL is a top-ranked university in the world. We have some of the best students in the world. We do a lot of research. It's all good. And in my role there is to ask questions, seek answers, and share insights, train the next generation. Here we are on graduation, dressed up in our gowns, celebrating their success and getting them ready for their future careers. What's the main topic on campus, and I've talked about this with so many colleagues and senior leadership, and no one knows what to do about it, is what do we do about generative AI? What do we do? I can't see that anyone's got any good answers. I'm going to give you some thoughts on what I think the answer might be. This is just an idea, so I'd love your feedback. I think there's a tension here, fundamentally. So UCL is an old university founded in this era, 1850s, during the Industrial Revolution. It was the first university to let anyone in, regardless of their religious denomination. It brought women in the same way as men. It was truly, for its time, cutting through. So it was embracing innovation, free, equitable world. And so I think it's only right that we start asking these questions at a place like UCL. But we also need to be thinking about how to protect standards. And that's the first thing that people start getting scared of. They see this technology and they worry that students are going to cheat, that they're just going to be able to press a button and get a degree for nothing, right? They're going to not bother learning. And I want to take that fear seriously, because I don't think we should be doing this, which is just going back to in-person exams. I think there's a place still for in-person exams, don't get me wrong. In moderation, I'm happy for a program to have a part of this, but it's not the only thing we should be doing. We should be also building for the future. We should also be building for a future where generative AI is going to be used at work, because the people that are going to get the best jobs are going to be using generative AI. So we've got a responsibility to teach it. So I'm advocating first and foremost personal responsibility. And we've just been discussing about how great it is here in the Netherlands. What I love about the Netherlands is that it's simultaneously a very liberal country, but also a country that prizes personal accountability and responsibility. That's my impression as a visitor. And I think it's beautiful, right? And I think that is the best way of having a society, that you give people freedom, but you also make them accountable. So with great, personal autonomy and freedom to do what you want, but you also should be responsible and take your responsibility seriously. So what's happening? Why is this playing out the way it is? I think the fundamental problem is that the world is getting competitive. And everyone knows it. Everyone knows in the West and across the world that it's getting harder and harder and harder to get a job, buy a house, have the same quality of life as your parents or your grandparents, right? The world is just getting competitive. And I think what that does is it changes our mentality. We see everything through the lens of a race, a competitive race, where we've got to get to the buffet table first, because if we don't, we're going to be left hungry. We're not going to get the best job. And I think this is really quite toxic. Because within this framing, anything that gives you an advantage will trigger reactions from others that you're cheating, right? It's like playing Monopoly or whatever your favorite game is with your family. Competitions bring out the worst parts of human behavior, right? We need competition to move us forward, but it also makes us nasty, right? Hence why we get into wars. I've been really influenced here by Advait Sekar, Microsoft Research Cambridge. So I just want to hold this up here and really point to Advait's work. I would encourage you to read his papers. They are deep, reflective pieces. He's a master at writing essays, so definitely worth looking at in detail. The key insight I had from a conversation with him before the holidays was this. It's all about variability of performance. So you take anything that we're, our height, how far we can jump, how fast we can run, how well we can write an essay. Every year I mark students' work. It always looks like this, a normal distribution curve. Whatever we're doing tends to fall onto a normal distribution. You have most of the people in the middle, and then you have some people who are not very good, and then you have some people that are really good. That is just how it is, right? This is basically, so Charles Darwin, natural selection, evolution by natural selection, it relies on this, right? We need variability. We're not clones. We need to have variability, but through variability, we have a normal distribution, right? And it's necessary to move things forward. Just as a final thought, I was telling you about it earlier. So Darwin and Dickens. So Darwin's building was also where UCL site is. I think of them both as just old men. My question to you is, would they have gone for a coffee together? Who is older? In my mind, they're all just people of the past, but they would have had their day. Anyway, I'll leave you to think about that. Who's actually older? I think I know the answer, but... So let's pull this back to a simple example. And this is going back to school. So it's just a really nice thought experiment. So when you're at school, maybe you had the similar experience when you were at school. So schools, particularly for the younger kids, they love doing, they want to bring people into line, right? So, and maybe one way that's done is spelling or reading, the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic. So you might have a simple class spelling test, and then you'll have people which are very good, the teacher's pet, the ones that's very good at the top performers, and you have those that are finding things difficult, right? And need a bit more support. Notice ChatGPT here isn't able to spell. I think that's quite funny. So there's basic writing tools we can use. So I've got a little chalkboard here. I'm terrible at spelling. So I'll just say that now. And I've also got really bad handwriting as well because I'm left-handed. So chalk and pen and paper is the worst as far as I'm concerned. But other people have got really good handwriting and really enjoy that way of, like, they've got good spelling and they've got good handwriting, so they've got mastery of that skill. I don't. So, I remember being an undergraduate and being delighted at the advent of the personal computer because suddenly now I could do more writing with a word processor and I didn't have to worry about my messy handwriting or my poor spelling. I could just simply focus on the ideas, right? And it creates new problems like drafting, but the tool is shifting things around. But critically, this is Advait's point. He's got this beautiful phrase, AI shaming or technology shaming, is that it changes the natural order of things, right? So when we have a skill set, let's say writing, like with a pen, people who are very good at that and build a personal narrative that says, I'm really good at this because I've been told I'm very good at it, and it's expressed in my skill in this activity. If suddenly the person from the bottom of the class is able to jump up and join you for free, that is threatening. And hence this desire to then say, you cheated. If you find this interesting, so Advait has this paper submitted to AltChi. It's an open review. You can go and read it and write a review. The deadline is Friday. So please, if you're excited by this, I think it's the best paper we've got in the program. So it should definitely get in. So another 30 reviews saying this is amazing, that would be great. Of course, you might not think it's amazing. Maybe you think this is actually not very good. So go in there. It's your chance to contribute. It's an open review. So just go into AltChi, sign up, and bid for this paper. I'll show you one more time. There it is. AI could have written this. The birth of a classist slur in the knowledge work. So this is the point, that we have variability, and that's just how nature works, right? I think we can all accept that, right? Darwin was right. We need this because we're not clones. It's how it keeps us on our toes. But we use tools to overcome these limits. And that is both amazing, but also deeply threatening to some. And it depends on where you are on the line. So AI, again, is just a tool. It's how we learn to use it responsibly and understand its strengths and limitations that really matter. Okay, so let's go into a bit more substance now. You're sitting at your terminal. Maybe you've never used ChatGPT. What's going on here? There was a really nice paper at CHI last year from the Microsoft team, Generative AI and the Metacognitive challenges of using it. And they basically talk about that it changes the way you think, right? You have to approach the way you're doing work differently. It's a conversation, but you're directing almost like a boss, and it will do stuff for you, but you very much need to be part of this process. And I think that's a new skill. So metacognitive thinking is hard. Not everyone's going to get this right away. And there's going to be mistakes as we navigate this space. So this is a bit of a take on an email. It's over the top, but we have received these emails, right? So this was motivated by my colleague last year, who was literally receiving emails from his students that looked like this, where the student had used ChatGPT to draft a professional sounding email, but then not checked it before they copied and pasted, basically. And if it's students doing this with email, there's also professors doing it with research papers as well. So this was one that was published in a top-tier journal. And in the conclusion, there's a big section here saying, I'm very sorry, but I don't have access to real-time information or patient-specific data as I am an AI language model. And this was put out on Twitter. And, you know, it's interesting just to watch people's reactions. It was a bit like the AI shaming behavior came out. The number of like really hostile comments that, you know, this journal is garbage, these authors are garbage, this editor is garbage, how dare they? You know, why is this happening? It's like, we know why this is happening. It's a writing tool. In the same way that, like, what, you should stop people from using Microsoft Word? Come on, right? There's nothing wrong with this. The only thing that's wrong with it is that it wasn't spotted. I don't think that's inherently bad or evil. To err is human, right? We make these mistakes. So much so that when you look at every mobile device you have, you can go and edit stuff, right? When you pick up WhatsApp, you can send a message and be like, oops, and you can go back and change it. You know, the idea that we've built this into even Twitter gave up on this. Twitter didn't allow you to edit tweets, and then they eventually, and now, of course, we don't even know what Twitter is anymore. What's it called? X. No one uses it. So we had a paper on this a couple of years ago at CHI. The ability to unsay things is super important in technology. And the reason we need to unsay things is because we leave permanent records of what we say in these digital artifacts, but we also work quickly with them and we can say things incorrectly. So we need to be able to pull back. Now, obviously, that can go disastrously wrong if you post, you know, onto a social network and you said something that you maybe regretted afterwards. There are obviously many examples where things go horribly wrong, and it's hard to say unsay things. But this is the core problem. It's the paradox of usability. We've done too good of a job. So all these computing technologies, it's made it too easy for us to, you know, have an idea, put it on a social media platform, and before you know it, we've hit post, and then only afterwards we're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Right? So it's running too fast. And Danny Kahneman recently passed away, you know, arguably one of the most high-impact psychologists of our generation, previous generation. His core statement here is basically speed accuracy trade-offs exist. So you can either go fast, in which case you might screw things up, or you can go slowly, and you're going to be more careful. This system one, system two thinking, it's basically just a speed accuracy trade-off. And we've known about this in psychology for a long time. What you need to do is figure out what your threshold is, right? And what you're acceptable, what you're prioritizing. That's the core idea here. The problem is that computers have made everything run a bit fast, and we need to learn to press the brake ourselves and control our own behavior. So how do we encourage error-checking behavior? We had fun with this last year. We had an alt-Chi paper, and we did a design fiction, we imagined an AI tool that would intentionally put in the wrong information. So there's a lot of focus about AIs or large language models which say the wrong things, but they think they're right. We imagine here a system that will purposely put in something that it knows is wrong to see if you're paying attention. So if you copy and paste and then send this, we can imagine like your email client going, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" So it's a bit like, getting that kind of like, getting you to think about whether you really want to be doing this. Again, actions run faster than thoughts. You want to slow people down a little bit, put in a little bit of friction. If you're interested in this work, it was called Chat Too Long, Didn't Read It. You really ought to check what the LLM said on your behalf. So that was a lot of work. That was a lot of fun to work on. But this is going to be the defining challenge of the next generation, detecting truth in the age of AI. We're already seeing fake news, deep fakes, distinguishing what is real versus what is made up. These are the core skills that we're going to have to focus on for the next generation. So that's why, fundamentally, I don't think going back to the exam hall is the way forward. Because what skills are we training people to have? It's a bit like saying, we've got Google, so let's focus on learning facts again. What's the point? Right? If, obviously I need to have some understanding of facts so that when I read a complete fake fact, like, London is the capital of France, I need to have some general knowledge, but I need to also have the search competencies to go out into the world, know what a good source is, how do I validate the answer, how do I test that knowledge with other people, right? So that we collectively retain what's important. Again, AI is just a tool. We need to learn how to use it. So I'm going to have some fun now. I'm going to give you a case study of a recent thing that I did. So let's imagine you want to write a little 500-word LinkedIn post on why people don't like sitting on online meetings. So I've given my ChatGPT a prompt here. I'm a professor. I want to write a high-impact LinkedIn post explaining why online meetings are tiring and it's difficult to pay attention. The article should be no more than 500 words and should be aimed at an educated audience with some knowledge of HCI. And lo and behold, I press go, and it gives me some words. It wasn't bad. I mean, it gave 5 points, and they all seem legit. I'm going to have some fun now. So let's poke some holes in this. I'm like, that's interesting. So one of the lines, it said, research shows that online meetings often require more effort to follow, as we are forced to focus intensely on a single screen. I've done a lot of research on multitasking and attention, so I'm like, go on then, humour me. I want some research to cite on this. Can you give it to me? So it's like, hey, sure, of course. You can cite Becker et al., 2021, The Impact of Video Conferencing on Cognitive Load and Mental Fatigue, published in the Journal of Cognitive Science and Technology. I'm sure it's a very good journal, I guess. I know what I'm doing. I've got search competency. So I take the title of this citation and put it into Google Scholar. I don't see it in Google Scholar. That's a little bit strange. Maybe it's because I've just done the search wrong. So let's put it into quotes. No, it's still not there. Oh dear, it's because it's made it up, right? So, and I know this is happening, right? Literally, I've got a group chat with colleagues, and they're constantly saying about students that are submitting essays with just made up references, left, right, and center. Honestly, that should be a failable offense. End of, right? Because you're showing yourself to not be very smart in the new world, right? You're just simply believing fake news. So in this situation, I hate to say it, I don't like name calling, but in this situation, yes, it probably is deserved, right? Because you should learn a lesson from this and take more accountability for what you're copying and pasting. Fundamentally, this is not surprising. Large language models they're not production systems. There was a whole branch of AI dedicated to production systems and knowledge where they have declarative chunks in them. That's not how these technologies work. They're just reinforcement neural networks. They don't ever have a rule as such. It just emerges. So it's possible to convince your ChatGPT that 2 + 2 = 5, right? It will go round and round in circles, right? Because it doesn't actually have this knowledge encoded inherently, right? It kind of infers it. In our situation, these hallucinations, or it hallucinates garbage references. It kind of pulls together plausible word combinations, which are then not true. But it's worse than this. This is the thing. This is what the technology is doing, but what people are doing is not any better. So there's a well-known cognitive bias called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is like beautiful and deeply profound at the same time. Going back to this distribution again, the Dunning-Kruger effect in a nutshell says those with low competency on a task, let's say your ability to like spell words correctly. If you're a low performer, you do a spelling test, and then afterwards I ask you, how well did you think you did? The lowest performers think they did better than they did. And the highest performers tend to think they did worse than they did. Because it's all about, in answering that question, how well did you think you did, you use the same knowledge that you used to answer the questions in the first place. Everyone leaves the exam hall thinking that they did pretty well. Right? It's only when the mirror of reality hitting facts, that's when you get the correction, right? So this is a really quite a profound thing. So fundamentally, we can get lost in the mirror maze very easily. That's how our brains work. And AI is not going to help us out because AI is built in the same way that our brains are built, and it will just start hallucinating. It needs to touch the table and reality. So let me give you a solution. My solution is straightforward. It's still a race, but it's just not competitive. There's too much focus on the finish line in life. What are we racing towards? Seriously, what are we racing towards? Treasure every day, right? It's not this kind of thing in the future where life is going to, when I win the lottery. No, focus on what you're doing today. So I don't know about you, but I do parkrun, and parkrun's great. And the premise of parkrun is we're going to do a 5K run on Saturday mornings. And there are some people that choose to make it competitive, but mostly it's about just running your best race, right? And it's a much better philosophy. So what does that mean? It means you should practice your skills. Don't get me wrong. I'm still saying it's a race, but you're just not focusing on the finish line. You're focusing on running your best race. So often your best race is got there by refining and developing your own skills. This movie is beautiful and brutal at the same time, Whiplash. I think, I watched this and I've seen a lot of this in academia as well, in universities, the bullying and the control mechanisms, but that's the dark side of it. I think at its core, though, it's repetition and practice. And we know this to be true. If you want to get good at something, you do need to put the hours in. It's really that simple. So you have Malcolm Gladwell. I saw this book upstairs. I was quite happy with that. Malcolm Gladwell says it's basically this 10,000 hour rule. So, and he uses the example of the Beatles. How did the Beatles get really good? They just did lots of hours, right? Here in the Netherlands, wasn't it? No, it was in Germany, sorry, Hamburg. They did lots of hours, playing night after night after night. Critically, they weren't just playing their greatest hits. They basically jammed for like 6 hours and had to react and read the room. So not only did they get really good, but they also got very good at interpreting the crowd, listening to the crowd, reacting, and that made them who they were, right? That training. Science tells us about this. We have the power law of practice. The more times you do something, the better you get at it. It's a very basic fact. And if we want to look to writing, there's this really nice paper from Psych Science a few years ago, looking at Isaac Asimov. So this is the person who wrote the Foundation series. So the reason to focus on this is because he's a single author who wrote a lot of books. And the graph here shows writing time in months, 0 to 500 months, and number of books written from 0 to 500. And the key point to make here is that there's this power law of practice. So if you take half of his writing career, he only got to 100 books. But by the end, he got to 500. There's a speed up, right? And I think to go back to my point about what's going on in universities is that too many people, I remember being a first-year PhD student, and I looked at professors, and I saw, they've got 100 papers. They've got a big H index. They've got all these Chi papers. They've got all these things. What you're doing is you're sat here looking at that. No wonder it's intimidating, and you start going crazy. Be patient, right? Jesus, be patient. Run your own race. Assess yourself with your peers not by looking up to the stars, right? You'll get, worry about today, tomorrow will take care of itself, as they say. So let's focus back on writing. So using ChatGPT. So the metacognitive challenge is we need to learn to do this stuff. This is, so the Philips light bulb moment, right? I couldn't help but do this at Eindhoven, right? So we've got to keep hold of our ingenuity. What keeps us human? So insights, we live in the world, right? And from that, we get insights. So Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you had great celebrations. My advice for this year is pay attention, because this year will fly by and you'll miss it, right? So pay attention every single day. And it's that ecological validity. We live in a physical world. Yes, we do some thinking, but we exist every day. We exist every day in the world, and we see things, right? And we make little observations, capture them, use them, right? Use them to guide your intuitions. So I did this. I had my first meeting back at work on Friday. And it's funny, we're planning a conference, and I was quite excited by this meeting. I did some preparations. I was all ready for it. And then I joined the Zoom call, and very quickly I'm like, this is not working for me. It's a really nice team, but it wasn't working for me being on camera. Like I wasn't, I wanted to look at other things and just keep myself busy. And also everyone else just looked really bored on camera as well. There's lots of those kind of forced smiles, everyone kind of nodding politely. So I quickly put into the chat, do you mind if I just turn my camera off, put my headphones on, went for a wander around the house, looked at the garden, got a drink, and then still listened very carefully. And then when things that were relevant that I wanted to jump in, I either put it into the chat or then turn my camera on, turn my microphone, and then spoke when required. But at its core, though, and then it got to the end of the day, and I was talking to my wife, and she does a lot of online meetings as well, like, why is it so hard, right? That we've had 5 years of this, post-COVID, of working from home. Home is where we're most relaxed. We should be happy, but we're all exhausted and unhappy with it. Well, not everyone, but it's hard being online. And so I think this is an interesting problem. And I've got this long-standing belief that it's got something to do with this self-view window, right? I think that's the heart of the problem. And it's basically an ecological validity argument, because I'm not carrying a mirror right now. Even I can see myself on this camera over there, but I'm not looking at it, right? It's weird. We don't do this. Even if I had a mirror here, I'd probably be working not to look at it, because it would take my attention away from engaging with your eyes, right? And that's a fundamental problem. And then, of course, I was talking to my wife, and I was like, it's more than that, though, isn't it? It's because we're working at home. And, when you have people around to your house, most of us are house proud, you do a bit of a cleanup. And I thought, okay, this is starting to come together in my mind now. And I'm thinking, it's about the control. It's not just about self-presentation. It's the fact that you are literally controlling what the other person sees. So the simple thought experiment is this. It's like you have a guest to your house, but you don't clean up. Instead, what you do is you just simply control their eyeballs. It's some kind of like Black Mirror parody, right? You can imagine this playing out. Like literally when they start to look at the mess, you pull their eye back again. And it's this control feedback loop that keeps us constantly checking, because it's our responsibility. And if we screw up and see that we've got food in our teeth, that's on us. So we're constantly monitoring our appearance as a result. So that was the insight. Needless to say, that the ChatGPT essay it had it in there, but it wasn't drawing that out. So that's the core insight. Then what I did is I wrote a little piece, and this is my pipeline. I used different bits of technology. And critically, this has been dreamt about in HCI for a long time. So this is a paper from 1983. It's the very first Wizard of Oz study in HCI by Gould et al. And it was done at IBM long before any of the speech-to-text technology that we have existed. And they were imagining, wouldn't it be great if? And they were pumping a lot of money into NLP research. And, basically, these guys it's their dream come true, what we're now doing with Siri and all the other systems, basically speech to text. This was their imaginary dream. So they didn't have that technology then. So what did they do? They faked it. So they ran this Wizard of Oz study where they basically put the participant in one room who spoke to the microphone, and then you had the Gen AI here basically doing everything that was asked of it, and then presenting it on the screen. What did they learn? They learned it was horrible, like truly horrible, like because what people would do is they would speak and they weren't able to like edit the document via speech only. And we know this, it's kind of obvious, right? If I tried just like speaking, we know, there's a whole branch like QE is basically, that's what it's all about, is that speech user interfaces. It's not the problem with listening, it's about how that fits into the pipeline. The technology is able to listen and hear the words, but it's how do we work with these representational structures? And so you can't edit a live document just with speech commands. We know this now. So what I've been doing though is exploring an iterative writing process using these current tools. So what I tend to do is have ideas and have an idea and then capture it very quickly using this device, right? So I can just simply speak to it. And I don't do the audio because I'm never going to listen back to it because I work with words. So I speak and I just go to notes and I use Siri to just do speech to text. Critically, it's got loads of errors. I don't care. Because what Siri's doing is basically doing the correction at word-by-word fragments. So it's making all sorts of horrific mistakes. Who cares, right? Don't worry about it. Just keep going. Because what I'm going to do is fix that later in the pipeline. I'm just going to capture, I'm going to do brainstorming, big picture brainstorming, right? And I know there's some famous authors out there. So John Anderson, another really pioneering cognitive scientist, who's written a lot of books. This is how he works, I've been told. He works very rapidly to brainstorm and structure and draft an article. What do we want to say? Can I outline my paper to you in 5 minutes? And that's what we're doing here. And so I had this idea and I drafted 1,200 words and it was rambling and incoherent. It's rambling and incoherent by definition. I'm going on and on now. Speech is not compact, right? That's why, because it's the nature of the medium. You forget, you drift in and out of attention. It is verbose, right? And we know this from speech interfaces. The written word is way more concise. Poetry is beautifully concise, right? Over a couple of verses, you can express beauty in form, but it's the way that the words sound and they play, and it's just written down. You can read it and skim over it, and then you're there, right? So there's a difference between spoken word and written word. What I then do is have this little pipeline where I basically iterate over with ChatGPT to clean stuff up. First working at the first iteration, just fix errors. Then let's work on paragraphs, then look at big picture, then read over again, focus in on certain areas, put it down, come back another day, iterate, and polish. And eventually I ended up with this thing that was 400 words, right? Which focused on the key idea. I'm just going to give you one example, the main point of this argument. In the very first voice note I made, we don't carry mirrors around in person. We engage naturally. On video, the camera makes us observe and obsess over, the camera makes us obsess over control. So the core idea is here, but it's not well expressed. And then what we have is this kind of like refinement process to then eventually we end up with this published version. Imagine preparing your home for a guest. Instead of tidying, you control what they see, ensuring only the curated view is visible. This loop keeps us managing, not engaging. It's like poetry. And ChatGPT helped me get there. Critically, it often had blind avenues, which I had to say, no, you're wrong. I had to remember what I wanted to say. But sometimes it threw in randomness, right? It gave me inspiration. It was like, oh, I like that. I don't think I would have come up with this. This loop keeps us managing, not engaging by myself. That would have taken me a long time to get to. I got to this in like 20 minutes. So it was fast. But I have to know what good shit is, right? So I posted it. And this is actually the most important step. I then posted it on the world. So I thought this was nice. I thought it was pretty clever. But I might be wrong. For all the reasons I told you about, I might be wrong. So you have to put it up into the world and then see what happens. Yeah, and it got a reasonable number of responses. I should have maybe done the experiment of putting the first version on, 2 conditions within subjects design. I did think about doing that, but I thought it's not going to be a good study now because everyone's going to be like, we know what you're doing. So maybe we just need to do more research in the future. Yay, isn't that great? But there's a deep problem here. And I think this process, can be applied to writing your own research papers, to students writing essays, to also doing this peer review work that we're all doing. I think peer review is both simultaneously a really serious, important problem, but it's also one that's like got some really deep questions in it. So the basic problem is overproduction, right? Because we're all obsessing about getting to that finish line. We want to become the great full professor, so we're publishing loads of papers. We don't want to invest any time in reviewing other people's papers because we're just obsessing about getting to the finish line ourselves because it's competitive, right? Why would I help you get to the buffet table if you're going to eat the food before me, right? So no wonder we've got a crisis, right? So more and more papers are being produced every single year. There's not a big focus on contribution. It's people like, I need to write a Chi paper. It's not the, what do I have to say, right? And I'm not faulting people. This is not a critique. This is like, it makes sense, right? Because the world is competitive, right? They're looking at these metrics. You know, a Chi paper is a badge that I can use to then get the next thing in my career. It's entirely rational. There's nothing wrong with that. But then on the other side, you've got reviewers with no time, and they're like uploading papers into ChatGPT and then using it to help them write reviews quickly. And then everyone's just freaking out, like, oh, you know, there's all sorts of ethical issues around that. Should you be uploading papers into these systems? Are you breaking confidentiality? Authors then get really upset if they get even the sniff of large language model style writing in their reviews. They're like, oh my God, the reviewer didn't even read my work. And then they're like really upset. Again, does it make sense? It's like the AI shaming, right? You know, I trusted you to review my work properly and you just gave it to a machine. How dare you? It makes sense that people are so furious, right? I think they're wrong, but it makes sense, right? I think what's happening is we've got this old model, right? The publication model is a bit old. And really what's happening, and this is why I put this little nod at the bottom here, is that there's a lot of similarities in other creative industries. So I just jumped straight to the end there, YouTube. Or let's say you want to make it in music these days. You are going to have a big following on YouTube. You've made your album in your bedroom. You're good. And the record labels are sniffing around the social medias to find the talent. And when they found you, they will give you a big platform when they see it, right? But critically, no one these days is sending their demo tapes to a record exec. You know, you watch those old movies that kind of, you know, Elton John or Queen, you know, those kind of old, you know, it's always this idea that you send your tape in and the record exec will listen and then they'll give you an opportunity. That doesn't happen anymore, right? They're watching the crowd, right? You're supposed to be in your bedroom making good stuff because you can do that these days. If you're a good musician, you can have a home recording studio. It's not very much. You can just use one of these computers. And then, you know, are you capturing some magic? And that's how you're going to get the record deal now, right? Because you're already doing it. So I think there's a similar invitation there to think about how our publishing structures are done. Right, the last point now. I hope I'm doing okay for time. I'm going to deal with this thing of the problem with the hype machine and the coming winter. So there's a lot of hype in AI at the moment. It's going to do everything or do nothing. And I think that needs to be talked about. It's so good to be back in places where you've got fond memories. So I first came to Eindhoven in 2013. That's a long time ago now, isn't it? 12 years ago. It was a really good trip. And we were in this building, not this building, we were on this campus. And it was a really enjoyable conference. Auto UI, very timely and topical, still is. And it's still super relevant to the topic of this talk. A lot of Auto UI is concerned with self-driving cars and what we do with them. And I remember being at this conference and going for a drive on a street down there somewhere. I literally got, what made me think of this is my run I went on this morning, and I went down this street. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. And I went in the back seat of a car, and it was in a self-driving mode or highly supported mode. And the car was braking automatically for pedestrians. I remember just being like, wow, the future is here. Right? You know, some pedestrians walked in front of the car and the car just braked. So I forget whether there was a driver in the driver's seat. He probably had to have control on the steering, but it was basically doing advanced lane support. That was 2013. I now drive that car every day, right? It's our Volvo car, right? So current day cars have that support. You have some degree of adaptive advanced driver support tools that will do lane keeping and speed control. Critically, you saw there, take back control as well. There is no sense that I'm sitting in the back seat reading a book. First of all, I get car sick, but I'm not reading a novel in the back seat. I'm still the driver. I'm just using tools to keep me safe. And my gosh, it does keep us safe. So just before the holidays, this is my car, involved in a little car crash. So, heading towards a traffic light, it turns red, I press the brake. And the next thing I know is my seatbelt pulls me back. I'm like, what the hell? And then bang, we're hit. The car knew before I did that we were going to be involved in a collision. And it's a Volvo car, right? It weighs like 10 tons. It's got lots of cameras and sensors on it, and it keeps you safe, right? You literally, it's a little nod to Radiohead's OK Computer. An airbag will save your life, right? We need these technologies. They are good at sensing, and they're good to help us what we can't do naturally. But there is this kind of paradox of automation, right? Once you rely on it, then what happens when you pull it away? You guys are dealing with that right now, right? So you've got your cyber attack. How are you working? I don't even know, right? I'm kind of amused. I've been saying this to people. I'm amused that you should look back in the research on this. So Gloria Mark did this great paper, 2012. You're literally living a natural experiment. So just don't do email for a week. Seriously, it's the best thing. You could cite this paper. Don't do email for a week, and you'll be happier, less stressed, because email is an absolute chain, right? Going back to Marley's chains, we have this number that we always need to get down to 0. Don't worry about it. If it's important, they'll ask you another way, right? When you come back from the holidays, just delete it all and carry on. I wouldn't say I'd definitely recommend that. They're probably... it's a thought experiment, an invitation to think about. But the hype machine, let's go back to the hype machine. So that was 2012, 13, 12. And this is a Wired magazine article from, this is the thing, when you put stuff on the internet, it's there forever. And then it's just like, oh, that's sweet. So this was published in 2017. Mercedes promises, it's a promise now, self-driving taxis in just 3 years. So that would have been 5 years ago. So I'll just go down to the station and get a self-driving taxi to the airport. Still not here, right? So it's no wonder. It's no wonder. I get it, right? I get it. I understand why these people make ludicrous claims, because they want to get money. So they promise the world. And in doing so, there's a lot of nice things. There's a really good This American Life podcast talking about academic fraud. So, people that make up their data, and they often don't fully make it up. They base it on reality, but then they just overclaim a small bit. And that's kind of what's happening with these self-driving cars. They've actually made huge advances and actually made driving a lot safer. They just didn't quite get to the goal that they were hoping to get, and so they feel like they failed. But they've not failed. They've made driving safer, right? As my Volvo example shows you. It doesn't matter that we don't have self-driving cars. I want to be the driver, but I want to be able to drive safer and to be kept safer, and that's more important. So you've got to be careful about what you're claiming. It's my last thing, and then I'm going to start heading towards the end. And it's, bicycle. Talks about cars, but the bicycle is a beautiful tool. I love cycling. And we should all have a bicycle day every now and again. So this was my bicycle day with a friend on Friday. No, it was on Sunday morning. And it's this frozen wasteland of countryside we went out on. And the bicycle is just such a great way to explore. It keeps you fit. So that's good. We spend too long sitting at desks, so it's good to get out. It gets you exploring the world. So you can stop and get inspiration. As I said, pay attention. Pay attention every single day. You'll get inspiration. And it's social as well. I went with my friend. And so I said to my friend, I just need to stop a minute because this is capturing my interest. And he said, that's great. He drank some water. I took a picture, made a voice note, and then we carried on. It took 30 seconds. And now I'm telling you the results of it now. What was the observation? The observation was, first of all, a Volvo car. Got to like that. But these ancient, look at us. I don't even know how old that is. That was built a long time ago, would you not say? A long time ago. So an ancient house in a modern world. So we've got an ancient house in a modern world. And earlier on in the ride, we'd seen a burnt out shell of a house. And I was thinking, what remains after the fire? And I thought that was kind of interesting because there's always been fires, right? Every great city has had fires, from Rome to London. Obviously, at the moment, it's very sad. Los Angeles is experiencing its own fires. But there are fires. And the meme that kind of popped up during COVID era, the kind of "this is fine" dog, kind of captures this. Our anxieties about the fire. It's the dog is simultaneously, the dog is in the COVID bubble or in the global warming crisis, and it's just saying this is fine. And it's simultaneously, it's like, there's so many ways to read this meme, and that's why it resonates so deeply. Is it the fact he's like completely unaware of what's about to happen, like the frog in the water that's slowly being heated? Or is he fully aware of what's happening, is just at peace with it, right? Who knows? That's a philosophical question to reflect on. What I can say, though, is going back to that image of what remains after the fire, it's the chimney stack. The part of the house that was built to safely channel heat into the home is the thing that survives the flames when all else is lost. And I'll close with this kind of famous quote from Picasso. Every act of creation is first an act of destruction. It's a cycle of life, right? You have to have destruction in order to reset. Or to put it another way, time heals everything, right? So we're all focusing on archive paper right now. The real question is what's going to be remembered I told you about Gould's work from 1983. That was onto something. So time is actually the big lens, because time actually is the big filtering mechanism that kind of helps us see what's important. But it's deeply traumatic because we might question ourselves. Are we doing important research, right? And then we have anxiety. Oh, God, anxiety. Back to Charles Dickens. Let's close on Dickens. So Dickens helps us out again. So Dickens gives you this narrative of when you have these epiphanies, when you're like, let's do something important. It triggers anxiety and then helps us kind of channel in a positive way. Dickens knew this. He was a smart person. And this is the preface to the original book. And it's just so beautiful. Let me just read it to you. I have endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea, which shall not put my readers out of humour with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me, right? The messenger. Pay attention, but I need you to not get too terrified. May it haunt their houses pleasantly and no one wish to lay it. Critically, the book ends positively. Scrooge is redeemed. He becomes a great person, becomes a father to Tiny Tim. It's the perfect ending. We're grown-ups here, aren't we? So I'll just end with this final video because it just makes me laugh so much. An alternative interpretation or an alternative ending. There we go. On that note, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for the talk, Duncan. Entertaining ending as always. And now we have some questions from the audience, I hope. We'll start here. Yes, please go ahead, Peter.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with the idea of the dead internet theory. It's basically
Dad or dad?
The dead.
Okay.
Like it's dying.
Oh, okay.
With the idea that because AI and how we train our AIs right now, we train it on information based on the internet, and we use that to generate new content to go on the internet, and then we train based on that. Mm. And right now, and I think a lot of people are, including me, are experiencing the idea of there's a lot of, on the internet, they refer to it as an AI slop being generated, so not curated information, which is feedback into the system, which is actively...
You're describing Facebook, right? I mean, that's the social media. Yeah, I mean, so it's funny that people say, surveys of people say they think that Facebook is the internet, right? For a large number of people, like they seem to think, and the appeal of Facebook is that it takes something which is inherent. It goes back to Marley and his chains, right? Marley's ghost and the chains or the railroad tracks of repetitive thinking. So the internet is vast, but it's overwhelming. So what do? Is we make it safe. show me cat videos all day long. And it's worse than that because of the way the algorithms work. Their goal is to get you to pay attention. I like watching cat videos, so it's going to take that signal and then serve me nothing but cat videos. Suddenly my internet experience is one of cat videos, right? And so it's the same fundamental problem. It's basically the consequences of reinforcement learning. And that's the algorithmic world. That this paradigm of reinforcement learning algorithms is both the way that we have built the information age, but it's also blinding us as well because it's wrapping us up in these bubbles, right, of our own making, which makes sense because, yeah, I mean, that's how they get money, right? The product is free, but they need you to pay attention because that's how they're getting the advertisers to pay for it, because you're always looking on it.
What I find very interesting about it is that a lot of people that are now trying to search for information, and they get confronted with all of these articles. So if you have a problem, you Google it nowadays. You Google something, and the first, let's say, 20 articles are at least partly AI generated. So you'd AI shame them in that regard for not giving you the right information. And people started doing a trick of finding search results before 2020, before the ChatGPT thing really existed, to go back to the actual information that they wanted to search for rather than the more recent information that they could find. And I like how that also looks into the idea of AI shame, but also looks into how a self-feeding mechanism is actively destroying itself.
And that comes back to my point about the LinkedIn thing, that we need to, when we have ideas, we need to feel out and touch the world, right? And that's talking to other people or getting feedback. So I'm going to bring this back to like the student example of a student writing an essay. And yeah, so they have two options at their disposal. One is they can just kind of drop 5 papers into ChatGPT and say, based on this, write me an essay, spit it out, and then submit it. Or we can do what I talked about, which is that you have an idea and you think. So then, as a marker, so I'm going to read this essay to assess how good it is. But let's say I've got doubts. Does the student really have it? Maybe I just sample. Maybe I say, we will randomly sample 10% of the class. They'll come in for a viva. And in that viva, you need to explain where your arguments came from. Tell me, convince me of your essay. We're not going to use the written document that you polished and submitted. I want you to sit down over coffee, over 1 hour, and convince me that you know what you're talking about, and engage in academic discourse. Because I think that's what it comes down to, isn't it? That's how you need to. Because what we're going to ultimately be separating out are those that have basically asked AI or another person to do their work for them, the cheating. We need ways of still having academic integrity. And how do we do that? Well, in the real world, we go for job interviews, right? That's how we distinguish this. But we also need ways of doing that in assessment. And
so
I think...
Are you essentially saying that as academics, we should focus more on the theory behind it and cut out the complete, or maybe a radical way of saying it, but cut the practical part of the writing of the papers?
Well, I think that the general problem we're facing is that we're going to be entering this era where there's going to be lots of fake stuff, right? And so how do you detect the real stuff? Another way of looking at this as well, as I've been thinking about this a lot for my module, a more simple solution is when I was a student, extra marks were given for going and finding new references, reading outside the reading list. And that just seems like a very foolish idea in this age. You'll get more marks for putting references I've not heard of. Why would I do that? Because it just means that you can say whatever you want. No, instead I basically say to my students, write this essay and use only the stuff we talked about in class. And in fact, if anything, I had a student last year who wrote an essay based upon what looked to me like a whole load of made-up references. I failed it, right? Because I'm not going to, first of all, spend time to check them. But second of all, I'm an expert in this area. I've not heard of any of the stuff you're citing. Fail, right? You're not citing the most important work. It's a bit like saying, I'm going to talk about, this theme of this parts of this topic, right? Like, who's a good commentator on Victorian England in the time of the Industrial Revolution? Oh, Charles Dickens, right? It would show me to be an idiot, right? And I think we should get more harsh with the way that we're critiquing. So I think that's why I kind of talked about I think at the moment the shaming that we're using is not quite right. It's more driven by our own insecurities. I think what we do need to do is sharpen our critical lenses, because I think, you know, the role of the critic, of the reviewer too, still has a valuable role to play. Don't get me wrong. We don't like getting our comments back from reviewer two, who hates our work. But when reviewer two has done their job well, they tell us things that we don't want to hear, but they tell it us in a way that makes us pay attention and ultimately improves our work. And that's what we need to be focusing on. So we need to basically not be focusing on shaming people or upsetting people, because then they just get defensive and stop listening. What you need to be doing is helping people on this journey of seeing the errors in their workflows or their judgments or their processes, so they become better at what they're trying to do. That's education, right?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had two questions, one going off of Dita's question. I noticed that in academia, I think a lot of the solutions to avoiding dishonesty in academia via AI has been to prefer sort of in-person methods. And I find that so I was never a very good test taker, but I could talk a lot. So I would do a lot of the presentation work and I would succeed in that area. But I recognize that that is a privilege because I have like neurotypical behavior and things like that. And oftentimes the AI has sort of swallowed the benefit that non-neurotypical people face of that. How do we get out of this while
Okay.
still...
Yeah, this is a great... There's many themes to your question there. I'm just going to pick up on... I hope this is okay. I'm going to pick up on one aspect of it, and I think it's important. There's a lot of anxiety around assessment. I see this firsthand. A lot of students... Exactly. It's because the anxiety, it comes down to the fact that it's a race and that I don't want to fail. So it makes sense. Like if I'm worried about failing the test, my best solution is to not take the test, right? Because then I haven't failed it. So that's entirely sensible. But what you need to do is we need to work on creating safe environments for people where they are given the time and that you need to listen to what people's anxieties are and make accommodations so that they feel listened to and heard, but make it clear that, because that's not, I mean, going back to your point, but let's just focus on the job interview. That a really good job interview should be about a long dialogue. It shouldn't be just a 20-minute pitch. Like let's take some of the biggest and hardest companies to get into, like the big tech companies. They are multi-day interviews, and they are not like 5-minute flash in the pans. Oh, you said one thing wrong. No, they give you time to expand, and they acknowledge that there are differences between people, and that sometimes the goal is to get you comfortable using the ways that you can communicate best, and then from there focusing on how you can express yourself and answer questions and fit within that team, right? And I think that's a philosophy that we should be approaching for assessment. It should be getting an idea of what the person has learned and what they can do. But yeah, obviously there's anxieties, performance anxieties, but a lot of that is because you feel that you don't have much time. So by giving people a bit, of course, how you resolve that is very difficult because there are still constraints. We live in a real world. We don't have limited resources. There's still going to be bottlenecks, but navigating that's another problem. But I think the fundamental point though is getting people to be comfortable expressing themselves, right? And to not feel that they've just got this one shot, and if they screw up, they've blown it forever, right? That's really what the feeling is.
Yeah. I have another paper specific question, but I can ask later since Peter and the rest probably have more questions.
Peter and then
Sure. Yeah. I have a question about the using AI as a tool, or using tools as like a metaphor for thinking about AI. I'm wondering if that's not limiting. Like I can see it in some cases, but I'm wondering what you get out of that metaphor. And I'm specifically thinking about voice agents, where it's like we don't have tools traditionally that talk back to us. So then do we need other metaphors for talking about AI?
I see. So that's the key point. The fact that it becomes more like a conversational partner.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. I don't have an immediate answer to that, but that's a good one. So yeah, happy to pick that up further. And so yeah, our stone tool hand implement doesn't. we direct it, right? And the point is that this thing has a degree of agency, right?
But we do have social tools.
Yeah.
Tools that help us in social conversations. Maybe when there's these children with these iPads that use these buttons to converse with because they, for example, have a autism or a speech impediment. They use these social tools, so to say.
I can't help but think, I keep going back to art, I think, because I think art is quite a clean, creative activity. And, or making, I've been spending the last couple of days making slides, right? And it's still a tool, but I think what you're getting at, though, is that I think the tool does give back. So I think that's what we know about tool use, is that the tools we have inspire us to do new things, right? And it's only, I have a partial plan about, if I went back for the initial notes of like how I imagine this talk, it's drifted and moved quite a bit because there's, in the act of making material objects, it's still that you get pushback from the tools, right? As you make a slide, you get like, oh, this, and it's like that kind of reactivity. Same with video editing, all this stuff, is that the tool itself. So I don't think actually that generative AI is any different to that. It's giving you a signal back, an opportunity, and you use that because you are fundamentally like, moving stuff around. And this is just externalized. So what's it? This is not distributed cognition. What's the, there's like a theory label for this, and it's tip of the tongue, but I've forgotten. But, the act of putting stuff out in the world helps you see the world differently. No, can't remember the word. But this is like, 1983 kind of cognitive psychology ideas. But yeah, I think this is no different to that. It still is a tool. But it's kind of got that physicality. And in doing that, we kind of like take stuff out of our mind, put it into the world, and then it helps us see the world differently. That's why we put stuff out there. That's why we draw a line, carve our name into a tree, see what it looks like.
Then the question is that because designers have been designing tools for a very long time, so most of how we know to make products.
Yeah, tool. I mean, that's the thing. That's what I'm saying. I mean, that's my other point in my thesis is that this tool is, throughout history, we build the most amazing tools we can imagine, and what we've managed to do is get our sufficient. Going back to that very first slide. It's no wonder that there's Nobel Prize that came from cognitive science. I mean, that's the most interesting thing I find about all of this stuff. It actually came from people who study the brain. All this stuff around AI, it's all come from a deep understanding of what we think is happening in our brains, about how it's working, the complex ways that the different channels all talk to each other, and the fundamental learning processes. So all we've done is we've seen this step change in our understanding of how our brains work, and we put that back into our tools. So all we do is we literally put ourselves back into our tool. It's like a DNA thing. We pass it back, and then we use that to then move ourselves forward a bit further. So that's all it is. It's just kind of like dance, where it's like we put ourselves into our tool, and then we help with our tool. We move ourselves another step forward in our knowledge and understanding of the world, so on and so forth. It will just continue. And we're not at the end of this, right? So who knows what tools will look like we can't even imagine. That's the beauty of it. That's always what's so funny. Whenever you say about predict the future, it's always so spectacularly wrong because it's completely unimaginable. We won't be able to imagine what tools we'll have in 150 years because we'll be making tools that will be at the very forefront of our knowledge and understanding. By definition, we don't know what the big breakthroughs are going to be. David Shanks, vice dean in the faculty I'm in, and used to be head of department in psychology. I remember he always used to have this big point whenever we'd go to like the academic funders. And funding is always that interest. It's the same old thing. Every system has it. Funding for university or research is a mixture of bottom up and top down. Bottom up, reward the best science. Top down, we're going to try and make some strategic guesses about important areas. So we could say, hey, it's really important we do some research in AI, or it's very important we do some research in global warming, right? And then from there, that helps the bottom up process. But David Shanks was always a bit critical of this. He's like, show me the evidence. that the people can actually pick the winners.
Mm.
Actually, what you see over and over again is that we're very bad at seeing the future, like really bad, because we're blinded by all sorts of biases and we actually pick the wrong horses all the time. We're terrible at gambling. That's why the house always wins and we lose all our money if we get into gambling addiction. Instead, you should actually just be supporting the bottom-up process. That was basically his argument. Just do that. Worry about today, tomorrow will take care of itself. You will, by definition, focus on the important stuff though, because people are driven to solve problems that are important in the world. Yeah.
I had two thoughts. I was wondering what your thoughts about my thoughts. So one is I do a lot of stuff around meta design. So meta design is the idea that you don't just design an object or an artifact or software or whatever, but you design, let's say, the possibility or the environment for someone else to engage in this activity, right? So, and it's rooted in ideas around, for example, democratization of innovation, right? So that it's no longer the designer that has the monopoly on designing activities, but that you sort of create opportunities for others to do this. So if I have a emerging need, then I can engage in designing the activity. And in a sense, if you say, okay, AI is just a tool, right? So would you say that AI is another tool that falls into this category, that generative AI in particular allows us as lay people to engage in activities that were previously sort of closed off to professionals in a certain domain?
Yes, yes.
And if so, the follow-up question that I allow you to respond. So one of the things that we find in this domain of meta design, again and again, is that there is a lot of limitations to this concept, because at the end of the day, there is a need for professional designerly knowledge in a lot of these activities, right? So I can have great domain knowledge, and you give me some tools that make designerly activities easier, but it won't guarantee me arriving at an end result that is sort of satisfactory to my needs, right? So I could see something similar here.
Yeah, I think I want to come back to, I think that's kind of in some ways, this concept was most kind of captured around here. I mean, fundamentally, yeah, so one of the words that ChatGPT likes to insert into my writing recently is democratizing. And I kind of hate it, but it does capture the idea, which is basically this, what the technology revolution, if you like, meant that it did level the playing field quite a lot with this tool. And it continues to do so because it means that with an internet connection and a laptop, you can access all the world's information, right? And it's kind of curious in a way. I mean, that's one of the paradoxes, isn't it? That despite all this knowledge being out there, people still cram into it. It's still really hard to get into Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge or Yale or, these. And it's ironic because you can go do their courses online for free, right? But yet somehow it's not really working like that, right? There's all this knowledge out there. It comes back to what we were talking about here about the closed off internet. Is that, first of all, do you even know it's out there, right? How do you access and how do you join that league, right, so to speak? It's not that access itself is not sufficient. It's also having all the other social stuff and even understanding the words that are being said, right? And the framing to appreciate. So there is a curative process. And that's why I think, looking at what's been happening in terms of social media is one example. But yeah, I mean, people have been doing this for a long time. Recently, I've been thinking about this in the context of sport. And I've never liked football or soccer. I find it quite boring, actually, apart from when there's the World Cup on, and then I like the nationalism. That's quite fun. It's like nationalism, but the safe version of it. But one thing that's I hadn't really appreciated about football, and that it really is a meritocracy in the cleanest sense. If you want to be playing for one of the best teams in the world, you're not going to play because your daddy played for the team. Like David Beckham was a great footballer. His sons are probably, or daughters are probably good at football as well. You'd expect them to be good because they've got the genetics and they've also been brought up with a father who's very good at football, right? But it doesn't guarantee it, right? Because football is ruthless. And if you want to get into that top 0.1%, they have a whole screening process where they send the scouts out to watch all of those little league games or all those fields around every town and village. And they're looking and then kind of filtering upwards, right? So I think that's you've got to look to other places where we do this, right? That there is still, talent is still concentrated in the few. But it's thinking about how you do that in a fair and equitable way. And, I think sometimes the fairest way is to actually look for talent on the ground, right? But then, of course, that becomes a bit of a paradox as well, because then suddenly, I mean, it's funny, my daughter was telling me about this essay. She told me it was a strange Twilight Zone episode where the kid is having to do an important test, and he makes a wish on his birthday that he wants to do the best that he can in this test. He just knows it's an important test. He's not told anything else, but he just assumes that he has to do really well in it. He goes off and the wish is granted. He goes and does the test, and he does very well. And then he's executed because society has realized they don't want smart people around. And they come back and tell the parents, sorry, we had to murder your son. He didn't know that the test was actually to not pass the test. So, there's also the law of unintended consequences, right? It's amazing what we teach our kids at school. It's all the lessons are there, all right? So when she told me about this, I always thought that's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. It's hard to build a fair and just society. We're trying. And the technology, I mean, you could say that some of these tools are actually about these kind of choices, right? They have values in them, right? LinkedIn, YouTube, they have algorithmic choices in there, right? And they're building a society, whether you like it or not. Facebook is making a society, whether they've got it right or not. And I think that's it. It's our job to ask hard questions and get them to be honest about why they're doing what they're doing. I remember being back in the day, being at Microsoft, and went to Bill Gates' house. This is 2005. And I was really fortunate. We had time in the house, in the garden, and he came out and spoke to us interns for like an hour or so. And I distinctly remember him saying that in the future, not long from now, you should be getting paid to look at content on the internet. And I remember just thinking, what? What are you on about? Crazy man. But now I get it, right? Because all these tech companies are getting rich off us looking at stuff, right? We are the product, and we've sold our attention for nothing. We've given it away to distract ourselves, and no wonder it's causing so many problems. We should have looked at our attention is our most valuable commodity, and I wish I'd have been paying more attention back then. He actually was speaking quite a deep truth. Oh well, now I've realised what was said. Took a while. 20 years, right? Exactly. The main thing is to listen, though, and remember. Okay.
There was I don't know if people have time for one more question. Did you have one more?
I have back later for a question.
Yeah, sure, of course. Adi, did you have a
Yeah,
final
I
question?
had just one last question. It was about your paper about the cooking voice
Yeah.
agent, and
Yeah.
the question was specifically about a specific line that you said, the effort that tends to be negotiated between partners, yet even with contextual awareness, machine patterns may be seen by users as incapable of clearly and easily negotiating the division of labor in conversation. And so...
Sorry, is this a line that I had on this slide, or was it in the
it was
paper?
from your paper.
Okay,
about
yeah.
voice agents.
Yeah, that was our Kai paper from last year. Okay,
Yeah.
yep.
And so my question was, how do you find out the need of negotiating commitment in a conversation? Because I'm thinking about one example, like if two people are conversing, one person is obviously not interested in the conversation, the other person might either increase their interest in the conversation or overrepresent themselves in the conversation so that the other person gets more interested.
Yeah.
or they might step away and then
Yeah.
feel in the feeling that they have been speaking too much.
Yeah,
letting
got
the other
you.
person
Well,
go.
that's the thing. We have natural conversational partners, and we kind of challenge each other, or we pay attention. What was the bit you said from the? What did I say? What was said in the paper? I mean,
you said that.
right, not.
that
I wasn't the
machine-
first author. Okay, yeah. Go ahead. I am an author, a
Yeah.
co-author on it. But yeah,
One
go
of
ahead.
you all said
Yeah.
that people perceive that people have the bias that machines are incapable of negotiating conversational commitment as are humans. And I'm wondering what exactly it takes to negotiate conversational commitment.
Okay, I think I get you. Okay, so I've
in the context of like contextual personalization.
I'm just going to jump back up to that to this image here from her. I'm not quite. So forgive me if I've misinterpreted the question, but I all I can say is I've been using ChatGPT a lot, and this movie was ahead of its time, right? I need to rewatch it, I think. So, we've got a lonely man who, the basic plot was he goes through a divorce, doesn't he? And then he's basically struggling. And so he plugs his earpiece in and he's got this kind of companion. But it's not a challenging relationship, right? It's a safe relationship. That's fundamentally what this is. It's like it's the person that just says yes to you all the time. And, yes, the truth is that we can, one of the problems of leaders of the world, right, is there's a new leader going to be sworn in soon who famously sacks anyone who says anything bad, right? No, if you're a good leader, you should be open to criticism. Unfortunately, leaders don't like to be challenged, and so they surround themselves by yes men, right, or yes people. And that's kind of what this movie was kind of getting at, is that, we can with our AI tools, and I feel that way, chatting to GPT, everything I do is amazing. Like, even if I gave ChatGPT a Kai reviewer persona and say, now butcher my paper, it would still tell me it's amazing, right? Or it would be like, so diplomatic. And so I think that's probably a reflection of how it's been trained. It is curious that ChatGPT is so nice.
Yeah, exactly.
There must be some kind of like niceness switch in it. It's almost like, data or something like that, got the system, every concept we have of AI has this kind of like protocol switch that like, be nice. I think I watched some kind of Wallace and Gromit thing over the holidays, and it's like, again, system protocol number 1, never say anything bad to the human. And then you turn it off and they always go dark, right? And it feels like that's kind of what's going on here, is a kind of desire to please and say nice things. I mean, it probably makes sense in the case of something like ChatGPT. It's all about rewards, right? So it's not realized it can get rewards by being nasty. Probably because it's not got agency, right? It's not getting somewhere itself. The reason why we're nasty to each other is because it gets us
ulterior motive.
Yeah, exactly. We put you down so I can get to the buffet table before you. We learned this early on with siblings and, on the street with kids, right? Sorry, you're going to jump in.
You can prompt it to be also unpolite, I think.
Sorry?
You can, I think.
Oh, you can get it to be rude.
I heard that you can prompt it to be unpolite or contradict you.
I bet there would be. I mean, if we're talking about how to make a bit more money, that would be like a nice little twist. Train this thing up to be a bit more adversarial, right? I'm sorry, but people need this, right? That's ultimately where this movie kind of gets to the place where it doesn't help, right? That's the thing. Like, it's the harsh reality is that sometimes people want sympathy and they want soothing, they want to be told it's all okay. Yes, that you might need to comfort people at the right time, but also sometimes the hard lesson is to get on with it. And be told you're wrong.
And that makes for a more natural human conversation, but I'm not sure how to negotiate that between the user and the agent.
Well, the trouble is, I mean, this is the thing, we're just getting to the level of personalization. So I guess as these things learn more about you and they kind of develop a more kind of like personalized, where helping you achieve your goals, how could that play out? Who knows? I mean, you could imagine like, so you could, these things are probably pretty good at doing personality quizzes. Like, oh, I always tend to put others before myself. And then it'd be like, okay, tell me about your day. I did this, I did that. And maybe it could then give you you're doing that thing again, aren't you? You could imagine this kind of like personalized therapist kind of role potentially playing out. But I mean, it would just be a case of, I don't know, I don't know if that's possible with current technology. It seems like it could be, but it'd be a degree of personalization.
That's what I'm looking for in that research.
Amazing. No, it's super interesting.
Because it doesn't have an ego, kind of. So
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people like ChatGPT because it's a selfless kind of.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, what's that show on Apple TV with the Harrison Ford and the psychologists? I mean, that's the irony is that psychologists also have their own lives and complications. That's what makes, in a way, ChatGPT the best psychologist or, therapist, because, it doesn't have its own life to get back on with. It can just sit there all till the end of time listening to us, helping us. So potentially it's a good piece of technology. But yeah, you're right. It needs to be a bit more... bit more telling us some hard truths. But there's a trouble there. It's negotiation, though, because that's the thing. If it goes back to that thing I said about Dickens, right? And that's the thing that, people. It's not just enough to give people a hard lesson. You need to help them get there, right? And so I think that's probably a question for those kind of like therapist bots. Is, I can see right away what the problem is. I can diagnose it right away. But there's going to be like 10 steps we're going to have to work on over 7 years doing this and that. And it's probably going to involve not just talking, but also action as well. You're probably going to have to change features of your life, the people you're hanging out with, the kind of roles you're taking on, blah, 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 right? On it goes. Maybe. I mean, there's a potential there to help people, right? Maybe they can just help themselves. Okay?
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for also staying on. As mentioned, Duncan is going to be around for a visit today, tomorrow, throughout the week. Really come talk to us if you haven't signed up yet to talk with him. Otherwise, I hope you can join us for drinks and bites at 5 o'clock at 100 Watt. We're going to be walking there from here with Duncan as soon as we are wrapped up here. So let's thank Duncan one more time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.